2683. That's 1-888-388-2683. Or visit billygraham.org.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to this Friday edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Glad to have you in the conversation. Don't forget, for podcasts, Brian Fisher is my name. Congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent.
As always.
Rob Gardner in the house, giving Jeff Reed the day off so he can socially distance himself as far as possible from Rob and for me. Good for his health. We approve. All right, let's... want to mention we have podcasts. If you miss a broadcast, a Focal Point, you can catch it at our podcast page, afr.net. Go to the podcast button at the top, scroll down, find the Focal Point button, click on it, get the podcast for the day. You can subscribe there. Also got a podcast, The Life and Liberty Minute. It's a 60-second feature I do for our network every day. You can find the podcast for that right there also. The email address, if you want to contact us that way, is focalpoint at afa.net. Focalpoint at afa.net. A couple of other quick things. We are getting ready for our spring share-a-thon. If you have a testimony about how Focal Point or American Family Radio in general has touched you, it's impacted you, it's affected you, maybe you've sort of been stabilized through this coronavirus meltdown by what you've heard on AFR. Maybe it's kind of given you the information you need to kind of settle you down, to kind of see things clearly. If so, we'd love to hear from you. We may be able to play your testimony during our spring share-a-thon. The number to call if you want to record your listener testimony, 877-876-8893. That's 877-876-8893. All right, well, let's turn our attention to the Word of God. We are in the book of Proverbs. Remember, the book of Proverbs is the book on which I've based my Boy to Man book. It's built around the wisdom of Solomon in the book of Proverbs. As I've explained before, it just dawned on me one day as I was reading through Proverbs a number of years ago, how many times Solomon uses the phrase, my son. I think it's 23 times, all told, in the book of Proverbs. He uses the phrase, my son. And it just hit me like a bolt out of the blue. This is Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, preserving for us what he wanted his own son to know on his way to mature manhood. So that's why I chose to build a book on fatherhood, the Boy to Man book, on the wisdom of the book of Proverbs. So this is the wisdom of Solomon. Proverbs is like a fatherhood training manual. It's a training manual for fathers to bring their sons up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Now, I just want to read an excerpt from chapter 5. We're in chapters 4 and 5 today in our reading and prayer. But Solomon spends a fair amount of time talking about sexual purity. And this is one of the longer sections of the book where he talks about that. He says in verse 3, the lips of he's talking to his son now, says back in verse 1 of chapter 5, my son, be attentive to my wisdom. And so a couple of verses later, he's talking about the lips of a forbidden woman. Why is this woman forbidden? She is forbidden because you're not married to her. Every woman that you're not married to is forbidden, is a strange woman. Every woman should be a stranger to God's man if he's not married to her. The lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. In other words, she can come on a lot of sensuality, a lot of sexual appeal. She declares her availability. That's a woman whose lips drip with honey. Her speech is smoother than oil. So she flatters you. She's obviously available, and it's enticing. But, Solomon says, in the end, She is bitter as wormwood. If you follow that trail to where it leads, it winds up in a garbage dump. So don't even start down that road. In the end, she is as bitter as wormwood, as sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. You don't want to go there. You don't even want to start there. You don't even want to go part of the pathway down to Sheol. And down, she does not ponder the path of life. She's not thinking about where this leads. You have to think for the both of you, because she's not thinking about how all of this winds up, about where you wind up when you go down this road. She's not pondering the path of life. So Solomon says to his son, you have to do the thinking for the both of you. Her ways wander. She doesn't even know it. So as far as she knows, she's doing the right thing. She's doing the natural thing. She's doing what everybody does. She doesn't realize the danger she's in, so you have to be the one that's aware of that for the two of you. Now listen to me, my sons. Do not depart from the words of my mouth. What I'm telling to you right now about sexual purity, don't let this depart. Don't depart from this. Keep your way far from her. You see her coming, go the other way. You're working in the same office with her, don't go by her desk. Avoid her. Don't approach her in the lunchroom. Don't approach her you stay as far away from her as you can get. Do not go near the door of her house. Not something to toy with, not something to play with. Lest, this is what happens if you do this. If you toy around with this, you have an office romance or whatever, here's where it goes. Lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless. Lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. A lot of guys have had this experience. They got a fair amount of money. They divorce their wives. They get married to somebody else, and they wind up all of their money goes to people they have no biological connection to. Go to her children instead of to his. At the end of your life, you groan when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, or incline my ear to my instructors. Says, I don't want you to get to the point where you look back and say, gosh, I remember that guy on the radio telling me to get as far away from this as I possibly could. I just shined that on. I didn't take that seriously. Now look at the mess I'm in. I wish I had listened. And here's what Solomon says about the guy he's talking about. The guy says, I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. This guy's in church. He goes to church. He reads the Bible. He sings praise songs. He's listening to the sermons from the pulpit, and he's on the brink of utter ruin. And I'm sure right now, I'm willing to bet every dollar I've got, I'm talking to some guy right now in this listening audience, and that's you. You're right on the brink of utter destruction. You're toying with the idea of pursuing a woman who is not your wife. So I'm telling you to back away from the abyss. That's not where you want to be. Now, I've got a fair amount of information in my book, The Boy to Man book, on this topic, available exclusively, by the way. The only place on planet Earth you can get this book is at afastore.net. Where do you go to buy stuff from AFA? You go to afastore.net, exclusively available at afastore.net. Now, here's just some excerpts from chapter 14. And I begin by quoting from Proverbs 5, and I drop a little nugget in here on the way through. Let your fountain be blessed, Solomon says, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. And then I add this note to the 12-year-old who's hearing his dad read this to him. Bet you didn't know that verse was in the Bible, did you? Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? And I go on. Why is this woman forbidden to you? For one reason, she's not your wife. The time is now, right now, to make up your mind that you will only have sex. This is a father reading this to his 12-year-old son. I want fathers verbalizing this to their 12-year-old sons. It's my words, my book, but the father is reading it to his son. So the words are coming from the boy's father. The time is now, right now, to make up your mind that you will only have sex with one woman for your entire life, and that you will wait until you marry her to do it. Sex is a gift from God, I say. Some people think that God does not approve of sex, but they're wrong. He approves of it. He loves it. It's his idea. It's a good thing, a marvelous gift from our Creator. It is a powerful force, a force which has the power to bond two people together in an intimate union that is stronger than the power of hell itself. It is a powerful expression of love and commitment and produces an exquisite pleasure unlike anything else a man can experience. And by God's design, it is the delightful means by which children are conceived and brought into the world. But, I say, because sex is such a powerful force, it must be used wisely and with restraint, because it has the power to destroy as well as to build up. Now, the world won't tell you this. It will try to tell you, this is a father talking to his son, the world will try to tell you that sex before marriage or outside marriage is exhilarating, exciting, and problem-free. The world and anyone in it who tries to tell you that is wrong, dead wrong. There is probably no single thing that has done more damage to human society than sex either before or outside of marriage. Sexually transmitted diseases, children born out of wedlock, and broken hearts are all part of the bitter legacy of sexual immorality. Now, right now, is the time to decide that you will not fall into that trap. All right, well, let's take these concepts and go before the Lord in prayer, if you'd be kind enough to join me. Lord God, in Jesus' name, I pray for my family. I pray for the members of my family. I pray for every man, woman, and child within the sound of my voice. I pray for every elected official, every mayor, every governor, and our president, President Trump. And I pray that all of us will listen to your instruction, that we will pay attention so that we may gain understanding. I pray that we will never forget your words or swerve from them, so that your wisdom may protect us and watch over us. I pray that we will all recognize that wisdom is supreme, and that we will get wisdom and understanding even if it costs us all we have. May we esteem and embrace your wisdom so that it may exalt us and honor us. May your wisdom set a garland of grace on our head and present us with a crown of splendor. I pray that the years of our life will be many because we listen to you and accept what you say. May we never set foot on the path of the wicked or walk in the way of evil men. I pray that we will be righteous and that our path will be like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. I pray that we will guard our heart and recognize that it is the wellspring of life. May we put perversity away from our mouth and keep corrupt talk far from our lips. I pray that you will protect our sexual purity in all ways. I pray that we will always remember that in the end, sexual indulgence is as bitter as gall, as sharp as a double-edged sword, and can bring us to the brink of utter ruin. May we recognize that the steps of adultery and immorality go down to death, and their steps lead straight to the grave, and can bring us to the end of life groaning, with our flesh and body spent. I pray that we will keep to a path far from sexual immorality. May we not go near the door of its house, so that we may not give our best strength to others and our years to one who is cruel. I pray instead we will drink water from our own cisterns and running water from our own wells. May the springs of fresh water our mates present to us be ours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May we be satisfied with each other and ever captivated by each other's love. In Jesus' name, amen. Be right back.
And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and
SES mobile app. Just go to ses.edu. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio, and I am your host, Brian Fisher, the cheerful, loyal, and humble first mate on board the USS Focal Point. Our commander is on the bridge, and I serve as your loyal, cheerful, and humble first mate, or executive officer, as I have been told is the correct term. You know, one thing I want to mention here, I want to get into some sound bites about this coronavirus, and particularly about this chloroquine as a possible antidote. I got some clips and I have some information I want to bring you about that. But, you know, I was done some reading, some observations by other specialists in infectious diseases from Europe, doing some reading in that yesterday as part of my show prep yesterday afternoon. You know, and one of these men, he's a doctor, he's an infectious disease specialist, and he raised a very good question. How do we know that these people are actually dying from the coronavirus? How do we know that? Nobody's doing autopsies on these people. So we know that the virus is present, but it's like somebody has an automobile accident and there's a stranger in the car, and everybody just assumes because he's there that he's the one that's responsible for the fatality. Well, what these guys are saying is, look, we know that the virus is present, But we don't know if it's just along for the ride or whether it actually caused the death. Because virtually everybody that dies, not everybody, but virtually everybody, I mean, it's 95% in Italy, for instance, of the people who died of this thing had some other underlying disease. They had a heart problem. They had some other kind of respiratory condition. They had diabetes. How do we know, these infectious disease specialists saying, how do we know that that's not what killed these people? That the actual cause of death is diabetes or heart disease or respiratory. How do we know? Because nobody's doing autopsies. We just take them out and burn them to ashes. So I think that's a very, very good question. We don't actually know. Even our infectious disease specialists are telling us we don't actually know what's responsible for the death of these people. Maybe the coronavirus, all it did was weaken their immune systems to the point where their underlying condition wound up taking their life, in which case the cause of death is not coronavirus, and we've exaggerated this thing in our own heads. Now, David Plouffe, it's just a quote from David Plouffe. He's the guy that ran Barack Obama's campaign in 2008. And he says this whole coronavirus, from an electoral standpoint, is lethal to Joe Biden because Donald Trump has a solid base and he's out there every single day being presidential. He's leading the response to this coronavirus. His base is eating it up. And David Plouffe predicts that Donald Trump is going to turn out voters at an almost historic level. So that makes him very dangerous, David Plouffe says, if you are Joe Biden. Basically, Plouffe saying, look, Biden doesn't have a prayer. He is completely toast on this deal. Now, let's talk a little bit about, by the way, here's your Religion of Peace update. A jihadist yesterday pleaded guilty to plotting to blow up the White House, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Statue of Liberty with IEDs and a rocket launcher. His name is Hasher Gilal Taheb. You know where he lives? He lives in Cumming, Georgia. Who would have thought that a threat from the religion of Islam would come from Cumming, Georgia? This guy wanted to take out the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the White House, and the Statue of Liberty. He's out there trying to buy assault rifles, explosive devices, and anti-tank weapons. He's out there looking for anti-tank weapons to blow these things up. He's looking for IEDs, and he's looking for a rocket launcher. And this is a guy that lives in Cumming, Georgia, of all places. Probably the last place where you think a threat like that would come. And we're in a situation where we have 9.9 million unemployed, and that number is only going to get worse. This is catastrophic. This is far worse. We're going to see unemployment rates far worse than anything that we have seen even during the Great Depression, which makes you wonder about our strategy. Now, I'm going to read some stuff from other people, and again, I'm not weighing in on this. I'm not saying this or that is what we ought to do. I'm just trying to bring you information from people that know a lot more about this and maybe can provide a different perspective on how we ought to look at this thing. Here's a piece from Fox News. Nearly all of the people in Europe who have died from the coronavirus were more than 60 years old. So the question comes up, if 90 to 95% of the people who are dying from coronavirus are over 60 years old, why don't we quarantine them? That's what Singapore did. They quarantined the most vulnerable. They didn't quarantine everybody. They didn't lock everybody in the country down. They quarantined the people that were most likely to be victims. We're not doing that. We are locking everybody in the world down. Dr. Fauci out there today saying, I don't understand why the entire country is not on lockdown. Now, we'll get to that in just a second, Rob. I got to get to those sound bites. I better get to them here before we get too far into the segment. This is what Dr. Hans Kluge, the head of the European Office of the World Health Organization, this is what he said. We know that over 95% of the deaths, that's in Italy, in Europe, in Italy, and in France and Spain, 95% of these deaths, 95% of these deaths occurred in those who were older than 60 years. More than half of the dead were over 80. So this is your vulnerable population. This is where all of our focus ought to be, protecting them and protecting the public from them. But we're not doing that. You know, it's like trying to solve the problem of crime. Here's the analogy. We got a crime problem. We got to solve the crime problem. Well, let's solve the crime problem by putting everybody in America in prison. Would that work? Yeah. That'd solve your crime problem. There wouldn't be anybody out there on the street to do any robbing or do any looting or do any assaulting. But where would you be if you did that? And that's kind of the question, I think, with this coronavirus. Kluge added that more than 80% of those who died had at least one other chronic underlying condition like cardiovascular disease, that's heart, hypertension, or diabetes. Quote, on a positive note, there are reports of people over the age of 100 who were admitted to hospital for COVID-19 and have now since made a complete recovery. So even the elderly can recover from COVID disease. All right, let's get to some sound bites before time gets away from me here. Let's grab clip number 1. This is an infectious disease specialist by the name of Dr. Smith. He was on last night with Laura Ingraham talking about this hydroxychloroquine as a game changer. Now, this guy is an infectious disease specialist. He's a colleague of Dr. Fauci's. And he says, this is what I think as a medical professional, as an infectious disease specialist. Here's my opinion of hydroxychloroquine. Clip 1.
It's a game changer. It's absolute game changer. I think these data go to really support the French data. Now you actually have an intra-cohort comparison saying that this regimen works. And I'll get some real statisticians besides my sons to look at that.
Dr. Smith, thank you for all the work. You and I and our medicine cabinet of folks and all your colleagues, thank you.
Laura, I think this is the beginning of the end of the pandemic. I'm very serious.
Okay, so here's an infectious disease specialist. And he says, I believe that hydroxychloroquine represents the beginning of the end of the pandemic. It is a game changer. This is a critical moment in dealing with this pandemic. I've been talking with you about this hydroxychloroquine for 3 weeks now. So it's not like this is breaking news. Now, here is Dr. Fauci. And again, I'm not an infectious disease specialist, but I've always been hesitant. Dr. Fauci seemed like a solid citizen, seemed like a straight shooter, but after you listen to these sound bites, I think maybe your confidence in him will be a little bit rattled. Mine certainly was. Now, this is an excerpt of his interview with Fox and Friends just today, clip number 2.
Dr. Fauci, there was a worldwide study made of 6,000 doctors in 30 different countries, and the final percentage was 37% of the doctors said that hydroxychloroquine was the most effective treatment against COVID-19. Now, here in the United States right now, only about 23% of the doctors prescribe it, which is far less than other countries. And we had Dr. Oz on just 1 hour ago, and he actually was talking about this story. And Dr. Oz, Dr. Fauci, has this question to you about the studies.
I wonder if he was impressed or what his thoughts are about the Chinese study that we discussed yesterday from Wuhan that reflected statistically significant improvement in recovery from fever, from cough, and in pneumonia as well.
Yeah, you want my response to that?
So there you go. Yes, sir.
I mean, so that was not a very robust study. It is still possible that there is a beneficial effect, but the study that was just quoted, and on a scale of strength of evidence, that's not overwhelmingly strong. It's an indication, a hint of it.
There's a hint of it. It's a suggestion. But these guys are saying, look, we have treated people and they've recovered. That's not a hint. That's not a suggestion. That is solid clinical evidence that the thing works. 37% of these doctors worldwide, 6,000 doctors surveyed, 37% say it's the most effective thing that they've tried. It's effective. That's not a think word. That's not a feeling word. That's not a hope word. That's not a supposition word. That's not a hint word. That is a fact word. These doctors are saying it works. It's not speculative. It's not guesswork. Actual patients, they're seeing it with their own eyes. Actual patients are being helped by hydroxychloroquine. And here's Dr. Fauci. He's sneering at it, turning his nose up at it. And these are his colleagues that he's talking about. He says, well, there's a hint. It might help a little bit. And I still believe, in my heart of hearts, I don't know Dr. Fauci, but I cannot understand why he's not excited about this. I mean, his job is to stop this pandemic. Here's something that doctors are saying it works, and he's like completely uninterested. Thinks it's like a placebo or something. You know, and I suspect that maybe he really doesn't want this thing to work. It's not sexy. It's been around since 1944. He's not going to get any credit if hydroxychloroquine is the thing that brings this pandemic to an end. I think in his heart of hearts, he's dreaming about heading up the team that develops the vaccine, which will forever be known as the Fauci vaccine. That's 12 months, 18 months out. So he probably wants this thing, if he's willing to admit it, wants it to last another year and a half so that a vaccine can be developed under his leadership, which will have his name on it. Now, it's interesting. C.S. Lewis had this interesting observation about how he came to faith in Christ. And C.S. Lewis said, look, I had to get over something before I could come to faith in Christ. Because Christianity, when C.S. Lewis was in his prime, was 2,000 years old. And he was a smart guy, very literate, very widely read. He was a specialist in literature. And he was a smart guy, read theology, read everything. And he said, what I had to get past in order to come to faith in Christ was the error of thinking that an idea is better just because it's new. And he said, what I came to realize, there are a lot of new ideas that are out there that are just poppycock. They're just gas. There's no substance to them. I had to get past that in order to be able to come to grips with something that had been around for 2,000 years and was the answer to the questions that I had been asking. All right, let's go to clip number 3. This is the second of 2 sound bites from Dr. Fauci on Fox and Friends.
But getting back to what you said just a moment ago, that X percent, I think you said 37% of doctors feel that it's beneficial. We don't operate on how you feel. We operate on what evidence is and data is. So although there is some suggestion with the study that was just mentioned by Dr. Oz, I mean, granted that there is a suggestion that there is a benefit there, I think we've got to be careful that we don't make that majestic leap to assume that this is a knockout drug.
Okay, so Dr. Fauci, again, using the phrase slightest hint. This is not a slight hint. This is boots on the ground doctors who work in infectious disease, boots on the ground doctors saying, look, this thing works. This isn't guesswork. We've seen it with our own eyes with real live patients. You know, and you got to ask yourself the question, when was the last time Dr. Fauci has actually treated a patient? Actually had a patient and their family members in front of him looking for help. Now, I find his response, I'm going to be honest here, I gotta throttle myself back here because this is aggravating to me. I find this response on Dr. Fauci's part, I find it to be snooty. I find it to be aggravating. I'm getting less impressed with this guy every day It's not based on how these doctors feel. It's based on what they have found to work, what is effective, to use their words. This is clinical results, not a feeling word. It actually works, not a suggestion. Be right back.
Here's Twyla Brade.
(788-1813). That's 1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. Number to call if you'd like to join the program here in the last segment. I'd like to know what you think about coronavirus, what you think about this hydroxychloroquine, and so the number is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Randy Lucius will be there to take your call. Be sure and tell him the city you're calling from in the state, city and state, and very briefly what you want to say about it, because we want you to talk to our listening audience, not to our call screener. So let him know very quickly what state, city and state you're from, and what you want to say in as few words as you possibly can put it. The number 888-589-8840. You know, and remember, we've talked about this before. Malarial countries, an extensive demographic study was done by Dr. Roy Spencer, who's a scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He plotted it out. He looked at all the countries in the world, 134 of them that he was able to get information on, and he graphed them. 134 countries, whether they are countries that had had malaria or had not. I mean, there are malarial countries. These are countries that have grappled with malaria for decades. Malaria is present in these countries. Then there are other countries that have never had an instance of malaria. And he said, so these malarial countries, this is what Dr. Spencer observed when he graphed, these malarial countries, these people have been taking chloroquine for decades. Remember, this thing was invented or discovered or formulated in 1944. So these malarial countries, they've been using chloroquine since 1944. And countries that don't have malaria, they haven't been using it. They've got other conditions, like I got an email from a listener who's been using chloroquine to deal with rheumatoid arthritis for 40 years. She's been taking it for 40 years. No serious side effects, and it's working on the rheumatoid arthritis. But we haven't had malaria in the United States, and so hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine or that is not widely used here because we haven't needed it to deal with malaria. And Dr. Roy Spencer graphed this, and he says, I have never seen anything like this. In all the graphing and the mapping, I've never seen anything like this. The malarial countries have virtually no instances of coronavirus. It just doesn't occur there. I mean, in tiny numbers, but it's not there in significant numbers. Why? I mean, the suggestion is that it's not there because they've been taking chloroquine since 1944. So it acts as a vaccine. It acts as a prophylactic. It acts to prevent contracting coronavirus. And this is the stuff that Dr. Fauci is sneering at. Now, I don't want to impugn Dr. Fauci's motives. I can't peek inside his brain, inside his heart. But, if you've got something like this, you've got a study out of China now that's saying it's very effective. We talked about the study out of France. 80 people with coronavirus, they're prescribed. It helped all but one of them, or maybe two, and they were senior citizens. You've got 6,200 doctors around the world. 37% of them say this is the most effective thing that we've ever used in treating coronavirus. And Dr. Fauci seems to me just kind of turns up his nose at the whole thing. And what I'm saying to you, again, I don't know. I don't know what his motives are. I'm just saying this. If you've got a drug that has so many infectious disease specialists and doctors talking about the fact that it works, that it's effective, you've got more than one study now that's saying that it works, that it's effective. You've got studies out of Hong Kong, studies out of Singapore saying that it works. And you've got the lead infectious specialist in the country turning up his nose at that? I mean, that tells me something else has got to be going on inside his head. Because you and I would look at that and say, that is a no-brainer. Let's kickstart this thing and let's start getting her done. Here is the third of Dr. Fauci's clips, clip number 4. Let's listen.
It's understandable, and I grant that, it's understandable why people may want to take something anyway, even with the slightest hint of it being effective. And I have no problem with that.
75% of everyone in Spain is taking with success. French and Chinese take it, and their doctors are taking it. There's a lot of positive things. And I would be very curious, doctor, to see if anyone who's taken this for lupus or arthritis has gotten the coronavirus. That would be one way to go the other way to see about this study. But let's talk about some way to get do you want to respond to that?
No, I mean, obviously, this is a good drug in many respects for some of the diseases you mentioned. And the one thing we don't want to happen is that individuals who really need a drug with a proven indication don't have it available. But just one, I can't escape getting back to, you said 75% of doctors think that it works. We really don't care what 75% think it works.
We don't care. This is amazing to me. This is an absolutely staggering, astounding, phenomenal admission. He says, we don't care what doctors think. We don't care if they think it works. I think you can understand a little bit of my agitation here. We don't care. The doctors that are in the field, that are actually treating people, they're seeing the results with their own eyes, and he's saying we don't care what they think. All right, one last clip. This is Tucker Carlson. Then we'll go to the phones. Tucker Carlson talking about what I've been saying from the beginning. Let's quarantine the elderly and let everybody else go back to work. That's what they're doing in Singapore. Let me tell you real quickly about Singapore. Then I got to get to the phones here. Singapore is one of the lowest COVID-19 rates in the entire world. 879 cases and 3 deaths. Compare that to Los Angeles, about the same size. Los Angeles is bigger, but Los Angeles has got 2,474 cases and 44 deaths. But in Singapore, most factories, most shopping malls, most restaurants, and schools have remained open. They've got the stats. 15% of people over 80 that get coronavirus die, 8% of those over the age of 70 die, and 3.6% of those over the age of 60 die. Below that, it's just minuscule numbers. So what they did is they discriminated on the basis of age. They required those who are 65 and older or with comorbidity factors, that's the diabetes and all that stuff, to self-quarantine. Then they backtracked every known case of COVID-19, tracked down the people that they knew. They isolated the people that were infected, and anyone who was exposed was ordered to self-quarantine for 14 days. And that's what I've suggested from the beginning. We quarantine the elderly for their own protection. Then let everybody else go back to work. Soon as you experience the symptoms, the fever, the dry cough, the difficulty breathing, self-quarantine and get yourself some hydroxychloroquine. I think we ought to get this hydroxychloroquine to every healthcare worker in America because of its prophylactic abilities. So we don't have to guess whether this kind of approach works. Singapore's been doing it. They have 3 deaths from coronavirus, a population of 5.6 million people. All right, Tucker Carlson, last clip, then we go to the phones. Tucker Carlson about the elderly, clip 5.
What would have happened, for example, if we'd adopted a more conventional response to this epidemic? What if we'd asked the elderly and the immunocompromised and anyone else facing statistically higher rates of risk to stay inside, cloistered away? And then at the same time allowed the rest of the population to use informed common sense and continue to work? What if we'd done that a month ago? Would the death rate today be much higher than it is now? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But it's clearly a conversation we should have had before we locked the entire country down and put 10 million people out of work. But we didn't have that conversation. Instead, we outsourced the decision to public health officials. And that's the strange irony of the moment we're living through. One of the main lessons of this crisis is that the public health establishment failed us badly. The World Health Organization colluded with the Chinese government to lie about critically relevant facts during the early days of the outbreak. Once the coronavirus reached our shores, the CDC couldn't seem to produce working tests. Those were disasters. Many people died because the people we trusted to protect our health didn't do it. They've been thoroughly discredited.
So in other words, Tucker says one of the problems here is we let the medical experts make all of the decisions. But Tucker Carlson says that's not their job. Their job as medical experts is to provide counsel and advice. We should not be outsourcing these decisions. These medical experts have no problem putting 9-10 million people out of work. That's no skin off of their nose. So that's why you have to have elected officials that have to be responsive to the electorate making these decisions. All right, well, let's go to the phones. Let's grab a call from Dr. V in Virginia. Dr. V, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good.
I usually agree with almost everything you say, but I have my reservations about the hydroxychloroquine. And so first, I agree that if it's useful, it definitely should be approved and released. I think what Dr. Fauci said, that he doesn't care about, I think that language was not appropriate, but being a physician, I think that what he's trying to do is be cautious and not just give the green light for everybody to go ahead and use it without knowing if it's going to cause specific harm with off-label use. So as physicians, we take an oath to take care of people and to heal. that's why I'm against abortion, because abortion's not health care, but that's a whole other topic. But I think what he's trying to do, we shouldn't say there's a conspiracy for him to develop a vaccine and name it. I don't think he's trying to do that. I think he's just trying to say, let's find out if it really works, if it's helpful, because one of the fears of hydroxychloroquine is that it tends to disrupt the electrical signaling in the heart, and that can lead to arrhythmias, and then used, especially in people with pre-existing heart conditions, right? So if you use it in combination with Zithromax, then you have a higher risk of something called prolonged QT syndrome. That also leads to fatal arrhythmias. So, I really believe that there's some caution, there's some hope that definitely the reports are very promising, but I'm against releasing it just like that, because we have to know if it's safe when we use something off-label.
Let me ask you this question, Dr. V. You say that if you have a heart condition, this could be a complicating factor. Do doctors know that? Doctors that prescribe this, do they know that this is one of the risks with chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine? Are they aware of that?
Do. Yes. I believe they do. I honestly believe they do. And as a matter of fact, a specialist who's a cardiovascular surgeon and that we were texting not too long ago, said that they treated a patient in her hospital, and with the combination of Zithromax and with Zithromax and hydroxychloroquine, and had that 2 patients and had those prolonged QT problems. So I'm pretty sure that that many are aware of it. I guess used in the right patient, it may be very beneficial. So that's what I believe is happening. I think there's a lot of caution to not just release this medication and say everybody use it willy-nilly, just without knowing if people are going to drop dead from it. And then, you may have a lot of lawsuits on your hand, because if Trump goes ahead and says, yeah, everybody needs to use it without studying it, then there's another problem. Yeah.
Well, let me ask this question, Dr. V. So you're saying that doctors who would be prescribing this, they would be familiar with the possible side effects. And that's why we've said from the very beginning, we don't want this stuff handed out like candy. We saw what happened to those people in Dallas that ingested the fish tank cleaner, and it killed them because they weren't under the supervision of a doctor. So it seems to me that one of the safeguards here, Dr. V, would be that the physicians that would be prescribing this, and certainly doctors that deal with infectious diseases would be aware of this certainly by now, and that would be something that they would evaluate with a potential patient. Do you have existing an underlying condition of heart disease? Maybe this wouldn't be the best drug for you. Wouldn't that be a safeguard against that happening?
I believe so. But again, you gotta sometimes put yourself in the position of these doctors that are using things as last resort when the patients are really becoming complicated and there's nothing left. Like in life or death situations, they're trying something. So again, for the right patient and maybe the right drug, we just have to be cautious not to just say, hey, let's release it and everybody use it.
I need a very brief answer to this, Dr. V, because I'm just about out of time. How long would it take before we would know for sure that chloroquine worked? How long would that take?
Again, I don't know how many studies need to be done. They are looking at those. From what I understand, there are studies being conducted.
All right, Doctor. Listen, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you. I'm completely out of time. It's a hard break. Can't do anything about it. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family